there's a number up there, right, of people.
I'll be waiting. This is just us. It's just
That would be everyone.
No. Already been to chair.
Okay. Welcome to the August 12th, 2024 meeting of the Mobility Planning and Coordination Committee. As a reminder, this meeting is being broadcast on the town's YouTube channel and also via Zoom. And if applicable, the Needham channel is being recorded for publication, later viewing and administrative purposes. I haven't been notified that anybody else is recording this meeting. We'll take a roll call. Tim Bolger, Chair, present. Alan Duncan.
Here, don't come in. Yeah.
Duncan Allen, sorry. James Goldstein.
Here.
Mo Handel is not here. Justin McCullen,
Present.
Paul Molta,
Present.
Tyler Gabrielski,
Present.
Alexander Klee,
Here.
and we have Ms. Tenenbaum to present on our first agenda item, or second agenda item. First item is to approve the minutes from July 22nd, 2024. Has everyone reviewed them? Are there any updates or comments?
A quick question from Travis Pollock on the kind of the highlights or key points of the evaluation so far. Need for more sidewalks, and we're trying to go the other direction. I'm just wondering how that gets resolved.
So not all sidewalks are the same. So the idea, obviously we have a maintenance backlog, but there are gaps, connectivity gaps that we're not gonna just neglect because we have that maintenance backlog. So
Okay.
the idea is to look at it from a holistic connectivity perspective, and there's some small areas where we can add inventory that would be offset by
Right.
this other
Okay.
program.
I think Travis also mentioned, I wrote it down. Like how to, like our design guide may have elements in there, how to make streets safer without sidewalks. So like,
Yeah,
when we asked him at the second, at the second question, or he said something, I wrote it down, but I can't find it.
That's right.
But along the lines of, like, if we're thinking about removing sidewalks, how do we design that safely? Design.
And one other thing, not right now, but if we have a moment at the very end of the meeting, you raised issues about rail trail and how they should be discussed in the near future. That's all that's written here. I wouldn't mind hearing more about that or having that discussion at some point. It doesn't have to happen.
That's on the agenda tonight.
Okay.
yeah, off-street trails.
Yeah, so we put that on there kind of based on your comments before.
So,
I thought that was broader. Okay.
well, you had made the comment to me before the prior
Yes.
meeting, and I just wanted to make sure it was kind of
Great.
on the agenda so that we can open it up for
Okay,
however we choose to go pursue that.
great. Thank you.
I make a motion to approve the minutes with the amendments that that you had mentioned with regards to the discussion about sidewalks. So,
Second.
Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. Chair votes aye. Alan?
Aye.
James?
Aye.
Justin
aye.
and Paul?
Aye.
Okay, so the minutes are approved. And the second agenda item would be the presentation from Ms. Tenenbaum about the Orange Line extension. And thank you for coming, and
I'm just gonna share this presentation so everyone can see.
Great, thank you so much for the invitation to be here this evening. Ms. Bobby, I'm Mary Tannenbaum. I'm not a part of Transit Matters. I'm not a professional transit person or anything along those lines. I'm basically a community member in the West Roxbury neighborhood, right over the Needham line, who's got an interest in things like transit. Thank you so much. And complete streets kind of approaches, bike lanes, all that kind of good stuff that we've been trying to put in to improve and modernize our transportation infrastructure in Boston. And one of the things that I came across in the past year that's been interesting for us on the Boston side is this proposed Transit Matters report about modernizing the Needham line and turning that into a branch of the Orange Line through Boston and taking the Green Line through Newton and Needham to supplement the service on the other side that's currently getting the Needham Line service. So a little bit about that proposal. Again, we're talking about modernizing access by turning this into a combination of Orange Line and Green Line tracks. They estimated this to be much more cost-effective provider than taking the Needham Line to Regional Rail. That would take about, for this report, in a neighborhood of $2 to $3.6 billion between needed track improvements and station improvements to accommodate that. So very expensive project, and they compared that to what it would be to take the Orange Line and the Green Line, and they thought that would actually be a better deal for the budget. And they also had some technical constraints that they raised concern that it might not be entirely possible to get that much better service as a commuter rail line due to track capacity on the Northeast Corridor and things like the size of the right-of-way to allow double tracking, especially past the point of the West Roxbury Education Complex where things narrow down through the wetlands.
Just a question quickly, and it may be for Duncan as opposed to you. Is Needham considered regional rail now?
There's a lot of nomenclature that disagree. The T is advancing improvements to what we now consider the commuter rail system under the label of a rail vision.
I see.
Which I think the idea is a lot of parts of the network would become more like the kind of thing you see in Europe, running more frequent service, not necessarily rapid transit frequency, more frequent service.
So this is
and
not
often electrified.
more cost effective than the existing system, but that vision of a region, okay, thank you.
Yeah, correct. They were looking at electrification being one of the goals for a number of reasons, including climate change and meeting the modern constraints that they're trying to do to improve the entire system. And that has expenses. And there's also expenses to having the tracks widened to accommodate that kind of increased service across different lines. And also Amtrak, which is another issue that we'll get to in here. So our current situation, this again mostly comes from my perspective as someone who lives in West Roxbury. We really only have hourly service during the weekdays until those last two trains, and then it's about 1.5 hours between the last two. On the weekend, you get 2-hourly service, and then the final train has a 3-hour gap. Some of the other problems, this is not electrified, and I've read a lot of the bills that come through the State House, and it seems like we almost never get the Needham Line mentioned on them for a timetable, other than at some point when we electrify the whole system, we'll get to Needham Line, and we'll do it then. It seems like there's not really any real plans to increase service, and again, that gets back to some of the track capacity constraints that they talk about. We really only have dedicated track for this line until you get to Forest Hills, and then we share tracks with the Northeast Corridor. So once you're there, it's all the other north-south lines, including Amtrak, including the upcoming South Coast Rail that's hopefully going to open soon. So they really don't have a whole lot of capacity there. And also South Station has a lot of capacity issues with track assignments. And sounds like the ways to address that would be expanding that station or doing the north-south link. So the feasibility of expanding South Station might not really be there. And then, talk about the repair of the system. Orange Line has issues, we know that, but also I think some of the commuter rail stops have issues. I know the stairs at my stop on one side have been shut down for over a year because they're falling apart, and that's not really seeming to get a lot of attention to repair those. So there's maintenance issues. There's a lot of things that are not really optimal right now on the existing conditions. So that was what we have enough. It's like, when do we use this? Well, I mean, and then there's volume, and then can you get where you're going? And then there's also issues with, there's not just now, there's the future. We do have growing population, housing density, and jobs along the entire corridor. One of the things that we're gonna see in Boston is the Squares the Streets projects, which is adding a lot more stories to some of the buildings that are gonna be allowed by right. Talking about in Rosendale Village, this is going through it now, maybe even going up to 5 stories, from 3 now. So that's a lot more people coming in to a system that's already pretty much coming into capacity. For example, so some of that volume, if you take all the bus lines that parallel the commuter rail and combine them, according to the volume data that they have in here, that would actually be one of the busiest bus lines in the system. So we have a lot of people using the bus, despite the fact that it's pretty low frequency. It's not reliable. I know I've gotten stranded at Forest Hills more than once, waiting for a bus to come through that disappeared. We had a big increase in volume on the commuter rail when the Orange Line shut down. So if we did that, there's definitely volume, it seems like, to justify that we're at capacity right now through our area, and we're looking at increasing that. So we probably do need some increases on our end to improve what we have for access. The other thing is how, when do we use this? I mean, some of the schedule seems like it's probably okay if you have a 9 to 5 kind of job, but I'm in healthcare. A lot of my neighbors who would use this are also in healthcare, and it doesn't work. It doesn't line up with the schedules to have an hourly train coming through, so you end up driving. And that's contributing to our nightmare traffic congestion and all the other attendant issues that come with that. I also use it a lot for things in the evening, like playing in an orchestra or going out to dinner. All the things that, it really doesn't accommodate to have this kind of schedule. Trying to get back and forth from the airport doesn't work. And then one of the things that's really prompted this is, can you really get there from here? And the answer is really no. Our neighborhoods have a very low transit share compared to others, despite the fact that we really do have the lines coming through. We end up not using it because of this kind of issues. And that fact and the lack of access scuttled a lot of plans to revitalize this West Roxbury Education Complex. I know it hit the news with the talk about moving the O'Brien School out there. One of the things is that it takes 2 hours to get there on transit from the other far-flung parts of the city. That would affect any school that went there. So because of that, there's actually talk of city funding, putting in a station there to the tune of $30 to $40 million, because it's that much of a problem for us. So this is a bit of an issue for us. And on top of it, it's also the expense of being in zone 1 versus zone 1A, and that never seems to go anywhere at the State House either.
The proposal or the idea of a station there, that would be a transit station or a commuter rail station?
So right now, it would be a commuter rail station, 'cause that's the track that's there right now, and it seemed like there was some openness to doing that as long as the city kicked in some funding. So better than nothing, but it doesn't really address a lot of these other issues. So it becomes, can you improve it if you leave it as commuter rail? So I've already talked about this a little bit. We already have some limited capacity issues, and that Needham Line track really ends at Forest Hills because it's shared with the Northeast Corridor beyond that. Beyond that point, we have some issues because Amtrak is increasing trains. There's a new South Coast Rail that's coming in that's going to be using those tracks. And then there's also the issue with the South Station expansion that you need to have enough capacity at the station to actually accommodate those trains that come in. So questionable how much you can actually get from more capacity along this line. And just to back that up, I use transit, so I get these alerts a lot. The one all the way over on the side, I'm already getting alerts about this train is running 5 to 15 minutes behind because there's too much train traffic. These are all the ones that are talking about no crew availability. These are ones that have different things with issues with it's running behind, it's not running. It's actually getting about as many of those as the alerts I get for the bus. So there's definitely, at least according to my not scientific anecdata coming through, some evidence that this is not really as reliable as it could be in its current state and would need some work regardless. So then one of the things I was asked is, can you parallel the commuter rail, light rail, or can you put in the track next to it? So this comes up with Rosendale Village. There's been a bill that's stalled in the State House for a while now to do a feasibility study to take the Orange Line to Rosendale, but not beyond that because the right of way is not wide enough to accommodate both the Orange Line and commuter rail tracks past Temple Point, per what I've been told from my understanding of this. Beyond that, basically it ends up having a choice of one or the other. So anything we try to do to improve our transit is going to impact this end, which is why I'm interested in hearing from over here what the interest is and how this serves you and what things we can work on together, maybe to improve transit access for everyone here. One of the things that comes up too is, are we going to lose speed? Well, according to this, again, I know we've had our issues lately. with the orange line and the green line and the shutdowns and the various things that have made it slow. Assuming that can be fixed and optimized, which they really have to do, they estimate a 5 to 7 minute difference from stop to stop, assuming we fix everything. My personal experience is that it takes me about 50 minutes on the commuter rail to go from my house near the West Roxbury stop to get over to Back Bay between getting everything done. It takes me 55 if I take the bus in the orange line,
Did you say 50?
50. Because there's no way that you have to take a walk over and then you have to wait.
Oh, I see, not to the Back Bay station.
Right, stop to
Okay.
stop, it would take me about 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah,
But you have to actually get there. So when you take the whole commute
Okay.
into account, we have to make connections and get over. It takes me about 50 minutes to get where I'm going.
mhm.
And it really only saves me 5 minutes to walk to the commuter rail versus take the bus in the orange line. So that's another issue. And what about the green line? So I've actually already met with the Newton Transit Advisory Group. And they've been interested in the green line side of this project for, I'm gonna say anywhere from 5 to 15 years, depending on who you talk to on that group. This report does not include cost estimates for the green line, but they have them because they've been interested in this for a while and they would be happy to share and happy to coordinate with anyone over here if there is interest. And they are interested in communicating with us on the Boston side and with anyone over here who might be interested to see if we can work together on something like this. And again, on the green line side, they also estimate that the time to downtown should be similar, assuming all the repairs and optimization are done on the green line tracks. So it's not really losing anything to switch from the Needham line commuter rail track to a green line track, assuming they have everything optimized, and you also get increased frequency.
So just to clarify, if I may,
Good.
are you talking about from Newton Highlands to Needham Heights?
Yes, I believe that's what the proposal had for those
Okay.
stops. In fact, I think, yes, so that should take care of those two. There's been other folks who have talked about over there about doing a mega project that would connect Orange and Green out at Hersey, but I don't know if anybody else has actually looked at that or made that a serious kind of proposal. So interesting idea, but again,
It's the
don't know.
TAG, is that like a town official group?
Yeah, that's in the town official group. I think they had some of the city councilors there on the meeting that I attended.
Okay.
And I do have the contact who was very interested in this, who would have come tonight or asked to come tonight, but he's out of town, so he wasn't able to join us. So I guess future directions. I'm really just trying to figure out what is the feasibility of this? What's the interest in this? I know that we have interest on our end, but anything we do affects this side. So we can't do it alone. There's been some unofficial talk that if we could get enough interest that as far as getting feasibility studies, there may be interest in putting a line item somewhere in the city budget to help fund that, but that's unofficial and it would take getting everybody on board to really push to get that as a funding. And then, I don't know, there's also talk about what kind of model of transit through the wetlands area. Do we want the orange line? Do we want the green line? What works? I've never seen that really addressed by feasibility or officially other than the fairly superficial level that it comes into this report as to what could be done with that if people didn't want the green line, but as rail road bridges couldn't be rebuilt across 128. So all questions that would have to be looked at.
How does the Green Line help with West Roxbury, the Green Line extension to Needham Heights?
So green line doesn't help us.
Okay.
It helps the other side.
Okay,
Because if the orange line comes down through us, we affect the ability to have the commuter rail track.
I see.
So that replaces whatever stations
Okay,
would have to be
okay.
scuttled if this went
And
through.
and most of these proposals eliminate, it's not contemplating sending the orange line to Hersey, right? Like,
Yeah, they
it's
weren't
gonna eliminate
contemplating.
it at West Roxbury.
Yeah, that's what this one was doing. And again, my understanding is that it's because the wetlands have environmental constraints and the width of the right of way wouldn't accommodate the double tracking going through there. So it would have to be green line coming from the other side across the other old right of way instead of taking the orange line.
And there's no like proposal of like some other way to get like one orange line train in intermittently to Hersey or.
That's my crazy idea, but I'm not a transit person.
Yeah, if we were on the other side of the pond in Europe, I don't think it's possible to do in North America. I'll just stop there,
Okay, yeah.
rather than get into trouble.
So the proposal is to like eliminate our commuter rail here in Needham, like we would be eliminating our commuter rail for everybody here.
As it now
As it
stands.
now, and everyone would have to dig that takes trains, we'd have to move to the Green Line, if that was the case.
Might I offer a few things just from the history, since I've been on the former Transportation Committee?
Please.
Since the, basically since the commuter rail was rebuilt here in 1987, I'm familiar with history before that. And one of the things is that Needham is different. Once you get across 128, it's a different community, it's a different density, different needs. One of the things that really happens is as the distance increases, travel time becomes much more important and comfort relative to frequency. And the history is that back in the 1960s, the idea of extending the Orange Line to Needham was actively considered and was kind of not that popular with Needham and did not happen. The MBTA is now, well, not the MBTA, rather the city of Boston is now currently got a Southwest transit study or whatever, looking at within the city, and then possibly, you know, looking at Orange Line extension within the city. The Green Line has, the idea of the Green Line extension has periodically developed a bit of a following here. There are issues which I think the rail trail is aware of right now, that it's pointing towards a more rail trail non-motorized use of that stretch of track. And the things that are, one of the things historically that I've never seen from 1999 to the present is any real interest in or willingness to even consider losing the commuter rail. The reality is that it's not only faster, but it is more reliable. So that if you took the Orange Line's 8-minute headway and took it out to Needham, you'd be waiting for the train alone at just as long as you do now for the train that comes every hour, because it's so relatively reliable that you go to Hersey and people are arriving, 4, 5, 6 minutes before the train comes because they know it's going to come more often than not, almost all the time. Not great reliability, but reliable. So people, the vast majority of transit use in Needham is going to the destination, going via commuter rail to the destinations that are close to the commuter rail stations. And now that they've got a new platform, and one of our former members was one of the major advocates for putting in the additional platform at Ruggles, so that you've got 3 good stations that do connect pretty well to for a lot of people, used by many hundreds of people out of Needham. And I think, everything the Transportation Committee always heard over time was, we want to run more trains, but more trains would be nice. But what we would like is them to be, a little more, like to be more punctual to establish frequencies. And then the next things are the station conditions and, running late at night. Last thing I'll just sort of bring to the table relative to electrification, because the committee, our committee had long pursued and suggested electrification. Is that as part of Rail Vision and commuter rail, the very latest that I got by the advisory board is that they're looking at battery hybrid sort of locomotives that can run without overhead on top of them, so that you might run along under the wires to Forest Hills and then out to Needham Heights, without a catenary, and then recharge at Needham Heights and be able to come in. So there is continued motion and development by the Rail Vision team, and some of the issues that the Transit Matters identified are perhaps not quite so expensive as people might think. But ultimately, that 2-track, the alignment between, it really is Forest Hills and Needham. Sort of, it's hard to do both commuter rail and a rapid transit solution there. I think rapid transit is a good solution for West Roxbury, but it's maybe not that great a solution for Needham.
So that, Duncan, is that like a bunching problem? Is it like, what makes it inherently less reliable even with the higher frequency?
There are a lot of issues with basically every rapid transit line in the MBTA is technically over capacity in the sense it can't deliver more service without losing even more reliability than it already doesn't have. And that's particularly when we think about the Green Line, that's a really dangerous one because it's very unreliable. The D line, D branch in particular, is terrible. And I noted during the recent, when we had bus service on covering for the commuter rail. And I saw some, I talked to a few people at the stops waiting for the bus and, they said, I said, do you think about going the other way to Needham Heights? Because rather to Newton Highlands, because they ran the thing both ways. And I never go to Newton Highlands. It takes forever. And these people going downtown, when you start looking at people going to the Longwood Medical Center, okay, different math. But, we don't have that many people taking the commuter. I mean, some do go into Ruggles and find their way over to Longwood from there.
I mean, we could assume that the reliability would get better. About 20 or 30 years that this proposal might take place. So there may-
It's certainly possible. I mean, right now, one of the factors that the MBTA is looking at to improve capacity and reliability on the rail system is the communication-based train control, which, tightens up the headways. But basically you have to wait to get a whole new very expensive to do, and you wind up waiting, as the red line is now, you could put the technology there overnight, but you still have to wait until your present cars, to order all new cars to operate with that system.
So even with increased frequencies, theoretically, shorter headway, does reliability become less important when you have the higher frequency, when you don't have to abide by a timetable, you can kind of.
Once you get into that regime, but I mean, here in Needham, people are used to having to plan around that timetable. And the positive of that is that more often than not, trains are on time. They're still 80, even 90% on time at this point.
So we can't, they couldn't really increase frequency such that would mitigate the reliability problem.
There's not in terms of from our distance in, the math is not terribly favorable. It works a lot better in
The
the
further
city.
you go out is less
But,
control.
delivering that reliability is a problem at short headways. And one of the problems in the core of the system is that the dwell times are so long that, Park Street, South Station, Downtown Crossing, some of the Orange Line stations, that even putting in the signal technology to close headways is constrained by those dwell times. And, you can't clear the platform so fast enough. The trains take so long to load and unload that, one of the things I noticed is on the red line, we have almost exactly the same technology as Toronto's line 1. Cars are the same length, same door configuration, 6 cars per train. And the T cannot get more than about 14 or 15 trains per hour per direction through that, whereas Toronto is managing 26. And similar lines in Toronto and New York are getting 25 and 26 an hour. But you've got stations built in 1912. You've got, older signal technology, and they're all, so yes, if you start saying 20 and 30 years ahead, the question is, what's the path to that, and do you invest in that now versus, perhaps waiting? It's so that there's a lot there, and TransitNet raises a lot of the issues, but there is in some cases another level behind that in terms of the underlying signal technology and capacity issues, travel time issues, reliability.
James?
Just a quick comment slash question. Prior to the pandemic, I thought, and I took the train for many years, at least rush hour. We had 2 and 3 trains an hour, as I recall.
It was about a 40-minute, but you're right, we had
40?
more.
I thought it was
It
less,
averaged
okay.
out to about 40
Okay.
minutes
In
between
any
trains.
case, and now, as you said, it's less frequent. Is it impossible now because of these other considerations about other lines and congestion on the tracks and at South Station to go back to at least, somewhat more frequent commuter rail? And I know it doesn't make it rapid transit, but it helps a little bit.
Yeah, it's a step.
It helps a little, I mean, it is possible, I mean,
We have for many years.
there's finite capacity there. I think what the MBTA has found that even with the longer headways in the peak, they're getting a lot of ridership increase in the off-peak, going from 2 hours to 1 hour. And so, from a purely cost effectiveness standpoint, they're better off for the hourly
So,
headway all
wait a
day.
minute, I'm not sure I understood you. So in the past, non-peak was 1 train every 2 hours, and now it's 1 hour.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's every 2 hours.
Ah, okay. I
So
didn't
what the
realize
T
that.
has seen system-wide, they've gone to emphasize the idea of what they call a memory schedule, which basically winds up being hourly for
Okay.
most of the day for most lines. And they're getting it relative to, they've got more than pre-pandemic off-peak ridership.
Uh-huh, okay.
And total ridership is recovered now pretty well.
Oh,
So they haven't really lost, peak ridership. They're just not getting to the point where the hourly peak trains are getting uncomfortably crowded.
okay.
Yeah, I just find, like, my understanding of a train being on time is plus or minus 5 minutes, which I guess is always gonna be minus, but I think it's outrageous that that's considered on time. So it's like if the data shows that trains are on time, it's just not even true. My experience with Percy is even being the 3rd stop, it's late more often than not. But I think there are a ton of issues with American Transit. And I think one of them for the commuter rail is it's not a commuter rail, right? It doesn't have, and I know that there are off 9 to 5 hours, but once an hour during those peak times is unacceptable, right? There are too many stops. I think for sure the Orange Line should come further than it does. It doesn't make any sense for the commuter rail to be making stops so frequently, at least at the beginning. I think it should go, 3 stops in Edam, or you could argue maybe 2, and then you go from Hersey to Ruggles. And then Ruggles, maybe to back, there should be very few stops, and you overlap with where you have Orange Lines where folks can get out. And then that reduces, because you have a ton of stops, so then you have this cumulative effect of all the dwell times. Because you've got so many people coming, and it's just the stations, you have to go up and down the stairs on the trains, the stations are so poorly designed, it's just it's a disaster from start to finish. And I know that is a lot of things to fix, but I think I definitely personally, sort of independent of this committee, fully support that the Orange Line should go further than it does. I think it's very strange that it's stopped and it sort of hasn't. I just don't understand how there hasn't been some sort of extension of it. It's kind of mind-boggling.
You got a lot of opinions.
Yeah, I think
I don't
the
know.
trains, I think trains and I think even buses, shouldn't even need timetables. You should just be able to show up and reliably expect a train. Of when you get there. I don't know, if there's any way for me to help on this, I'm happy to. I don't know, or no.
Yeah, I think that what we can, we can probably talk to the select board maybe is gauge their interest in pursuing it. I think that's probably next,
If that was.
Justin. Now let's talk to Justin. If he says it there, yeah.
Oh, so I actually ideologically 100%, Paul. I work for a company that's based in Switzerland. I go to the mothership often, and it's wonderful traveling in Europe with train system that actually works. one of the things that I wanted to make a point that I think that maybe wasn't as true, or at least wasn't visible in pre-pandemic, which was the amount of people that are coming from so what was considered deadhead runs, or that they were coming from Boston that really were empty at later times. So you're looking at times that were, I've noticed it at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning, you see 4 or 5 people get off and cross, and they're all Subway employees because they're all dressed in their uniforms for Subway. I've seen, folks that are that go to Cafe Friday, or like basically they go to all of our coffee shops and our food establishments, and I've really seen a lot of these service employees as I'm sitting here waiting for
Yep.
the gates to go down, and it's really noticeable much more. And I think this was noted in maybe the next item or the item after during our RFP. That the research indicated that there are significantly more number of folks that are coming from Everett, Chelsea, Somerville, Boston, South Boston, et cetera, that are coming to Needham to work, or the zip codes that are coming. So I think there definitely is more of I'll call that a reverse commute, now maybe more than there was in the pandemic. So I do think we have to note that. I think, I've heard this. I served with Duncan, and obviously I see Duncan's expertise on this. I served on the committee with him. He is the rail guru, and he knows about this stuff. But I think that it is, it's, the history is that, yes, when I was on the committee back in 2000, I think I joined in 2014, Duncan 2015. There even that point was even some residual talk about extending the Orange Line, and there, you look on Wikipedia, and you actually find histories of previous efforts of the MBTA's Urban Ring and all these other projects that some might consider nightmares, et cetera, that were connecting Orange Line, Green Line, et cetera, and they were wonderful ideas, but the fiscal reality of things, I don't know. We have to look at ridership. We have to look at practicality. And I don't know if the town is, if we could support something that's not going to extend into Needham, you know what I mean? If it's going to end at West Rocks, and we have to then put all eggs in one basket into having an MBTA bridge to be built over 128 again that was removed. And now with all of the baggage that comes with the multimodal, do we do a pedestrian extension, all that? I don't know where we are with that discussion. So that's just my piece. And I think there's a lot more to be said for this, and a lot more discussion, but that's kind of where I am on that.
I think it would be way premature to bring this up with the selectmen. At a minimum, I think we need more discussion here, but does the MBTA have any interest in this? If the answer is no, I'd be reluctant.
High up on the.
I'd be reluctant to, no offense, but spend much time as this committee or town on it, because we're probably talking many decades before, and we have, a lot of other.
I think that, so our rail trail extension that we kind of have a feasibility study for the Green Line, which this would replace. Like our next step on that project is to write to the MBTA and ask them, do you have any interest in this line before we essentially do something else with it? So, that point of contact will know, I guess, from the MBTA, whether they're interested in maintaining the bridge or that section of the line for Green Line. And if they don't, then, we can't advocate for moving the rest of the train from Needham at that point.
I was involved in that rail trail feasibility study, and from what I recall, there wasn't a lot of sort of talk about future plans for that right of way beyond like maintenance track kind of situation. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that if it's a good idea and people, the residents want it, then people should advocate for that to the MBTA and try to change minds rather than sort of, oh, does the MBTA want to do this? No, then we're not gonna do it, but I don't know if there's any interest on our side is kind of the issue, like from the residents scale. At least for the, like the way Duncan was describing, like, I think the commuter rail gets a lot of complaints, but ultimately people kind of like it the way it is.
Tyler, if you recall on the community way study, which
Yeah.
is a pedestrian bridge over and biking bridge over, the consultant contacted MBTA and they were willing to lease it.
Right,
So.
yeah, you were part of
Yeah, I
that
was
group
part of it,
too,
Duncan was
yeah.
part of it.
Oh, yeah,
So
you were both.
that says something, that if they weren't willing to lease it and they had other plans, they would have said no, I think, or at least we don't know. But they said, yes, this is a viable thing, we would lease it if all the other pieces, I mean, they're not gonna pay for it, obviously,
Right,
they would lease it.
Do you know
Yeah,
how much?
that's-
Do you know when that was? Sorry.
It was last year,
Yeah.
23, and.
'Cause I know that it was like in about 5 or 6 years ago they had mentioned that, but I didn't know that was renewed last year. Okay.
That was the MAPC work.
Oh, yeah, no, we're talking
This
about a
is
new
just
study.
last year.
The Needham Newton Community Way, I don't know if you've heard of it, but.
No, I've
that's-
heard of it. I just didn't know it was that was the what the MBTA had said. I know that the MBTA had said that a number of years ago, but I didn't know they had reiterated that position last year. That's what I was saying.
yeah, now that you mentioned that, that was a sort of a task that they were charged with, was as part of the study. was
Exactly.
Determining if there was future plans for the right of way, how cooperative would the MBTA be? So.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty relevant.
I think that's,
So,
yeah, we would,
we will talk about it as a committee again, maybe.
yeah, we'll continue the discussion, and if anything comes up, we'll contact you if we want more information. And if you could share the Newton contact with us, we can reach out to them as well.
Absolutely, I'll loop you all in with him, and they have some information as
Okay.
well.
Okay?
Great.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your time, I appreciate it.
You have the agenda up there. So the next item is discussion for items referred to NPCC from the select board. They had a meeting, I believe, in August of 2023, and there were 4 items that were referred to the Mobility Planning and Coordination Committee. And I figured that we should probably speak about them and respond to them. Now.
This is the list.
So you're bringing this up, now because the select board is doing goals again, or just
They,
because?
I mean, it was in there, so they, I think they did goals last meeting
Right,
and, I just noticed that it was there last year and it was there this year.
okay,
And that we should probably maybe take some of them off the table, if they don't really, not really in our charge, and maybe work on some of the items, that they have there that could be relevant. They did mention in one of their meetings about having us or somebody go present in front of them at a select board meeting to get an update from us. So it'd be helpful to have answers to some of these things they refer to us
Yeah.
in August.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, so the first one is the townwide bike route map, used as a planning tool. I think that's what Tyler has started here a little bit.
Rudimentary.
Yeah,
Foundational document.
this was a little bit different than what you sent, because one of the bike lanes isn't quite there. And the rail trail isn't here, should probably be included on here as well.
Right, so. I guess I didn't consider that because it wasn't on street infrastructure, but yeah, that's
Is
part
there,
of the network.
yeah, is there a way to get this into GIS?
Yep, So this was really like back of the napkin kind of stuff. I think that this isn't something I would show the select board as a final product. I made this in paint,
Yeah,
but I think that it would be a GIS based map. And we could, so the piece that's kind of up to interpretation is deciding intentionally on which roads we would like to have a bike lane and where to channel the bike traffic. So, obviously, we're working on that classification, but there might be more of a sort of aspirational side to it in terms of like looking at the map, trying to figure out this is so. Like the yellow, the plans, bike lanes, you know, we kind of are building out like a spine from the center of town. That future bike lanes would, you know, I think I would be in favor of sort of building out from existing major trunks and then building that network from there. So we have like a pretty good start in terms of you know, obviously the tip project will take some time to put through. But once that happens in the Great Plain corridor project gets underway, we'll have like a central spine that connects to Newton with bike connectivity. And then we'll have a good portion of the northern part of Central Avenue. Sort of the eastern perimeter of town along Greendale. So I think, you know, it's. We're obviously the street design guide will inform a lot of this decision making, but I think as a group, it might make sense to sort of say, okay, like. What are the natural spots to go and
Okay.
what are the limitations of those areas? How can that be addressed? How does that fit with our construction schedule, that kind of thing? So like the remainder of Central Avenue, for example, like how would that look?
So is this central here?
Yeah,
Okay, and this is Highland?
yes.
Okay.
and Justin does have his hand up, so you set it up for a little bit.
Sure thing. Have we talked? And I'm definitely am supportive. So I'm supportive of more bike lanes. Have we talked as a town, as a committee, about the downstream knockoff implications of bike lanes in terms of parking prohibitions? Bike lanes do, by mass state law, make a parking prohibition that you cannot park in a bike lane. So. Have we looked at the implications of implementing bike lanes on roads that historically we have parking? And you look down Central Ave and there's people parking on bike lanes, which is fine because they've always parked there before the bike lanes were put there. So we could do what we always do as a town, which is to ignore things that, you know, like we ignore, you know, don't throw snow in the driveway, or we ignore you know, no parking overnight until it becomes a nuisance issue from neighbors. And that's fine, but is that what we're going to do for bike lanes? Or are we going to actually enforce something or create something or do something as a town to figure this out? And I don't know, maybe other towns have dealt with this, but this is, especially as we increase our bike lane footprint, we really need to look at this issue, I think, more than just what we're doing right now. So.
Yeah, if I can speak to that real quick. So I think that's a really great question because a lot of our ideas on where to go with bike lanes are going to be predicated on changing parking, removing parking, and we don't really have a good formalized process for how that is adjudicated.
Yeah, I mean, everywhere you just put an on lane. Bike lane, there's no parking left, but, you know. It seems to be working fine on Greendale Ave and Central Ave, like Justin said. As it is now. how do you do that equitably to say that, you know, like that public space in front of someone's house, I guess. On Greendale, they no longer have the ability to park in front of the house, which they can still park outside of the bike lane, but, you know. In most of the instances of the planned bike infrastructure, you can still park in the street technically. You just can't park in the bike lane,
Yeah, but if you're not in the bike lane, you're in the street.
correct?
Well,
There's,
on Greendale, you're not gonna park in the street, are you? I mean, that
well, I
doesn't
mean,
seem feasible.
With our width, it's not, I mean, if you were to park 3 foot astride of the curb, your vehicle is 5.5 to 6 feet wide, like no, that's not, I mean,
Well,
yeah, we have
In a
20
bike
foot, we have 20-foot streets like. Pinewood Road or Stevens Road, those are like 20 feet wide. And people park on the side of those roads, correct?
right, I'm talking about, I mean, Greendale,
Mhm.
you wouldn't be able to park. On the roadside of the bike lane.
I think it's a de facto parking.
Yeah, I mean,
Restrictions.
right, whether there's bike lane there or a curb, there's a curb, you essentially just park in the road.
Yeah,
right?
what Justin is saying
take
is.
like Central, you park on Central in a bike lane, you can't park like outside of the bike lane because you're in the middle of the road.
Yeah,
That's what I mean.
but it's an enforcement question.
Well, I mean, but you can park in the middle of it, right? I mean,
Not in the middle of it, no.
You-
Well, there's no
Well,
parking.
on
If
the
you're-
edge, if there's no bike
if
line,
you're
you can
within
park on the
12,
edge.
if you're within 12 inches of the edge of the road, I believe is the parking regulation. That you're
Right.
able to park on the Needham right of way, as long as you're within 12 inches of the edge of the road. The bike lane is the edge of the road. Then technically you can park,
So,
right?
You block traffic.
Well, so
I mean,
yes, okay, yes, I guess
It
so, but
would
that's,
essentially force you, if you're a motorist, to slow down and go around a car that would be essentially parked in the right of way, which it would be on a 20-foot road anywhere else we have a 20-foot road, where we don't prohibit parking.
I think the problem is that
like, we don't prohibit parking like in 85% of Needham. Most people don't realize you can park on South Street. Like, it's perfectly legal to park on High Rock or South Street, which are roads that you just don't want to park on. But yeah, you can park on there and be perfectly legal. We just need now, if we're all I'm saying is, if we are going to roll out a bike lane policy, we need to be cognizant of our parking policy, especially as, and I'm speaking as a planning board member, we're densifying our zoning, and this is going to be great. More people can use bike lanes, more people can use the mobile transportation. However, we need to be cognizant of the prohibitions that it's going to cause, and I think we need to move beyond the ignore, because that's what we do now. We ignore, just like we ignore plowing or throwing snow in the road and ignore parking overnight. We will need to move away from ignoring, yes, it's on Greendale, yes, it's on Central, but as we do more bike lanes, we need to be, that's all I'm saying, is we need to be cognizant of what we're going to do in our posture as a town.
Yeah, I think everyone agrees with that. I think it's, sort of in tandem with police and, them looking at how other communities have handled similar sort of network build outs. I feel like so much of it is sort of like, community policing and sort of, what is worth, going after people on and what isn't. And historically with parking, I feel like it's been pretty hands-off in Needham for the most part, so.
I agree with you, Justin, that it has to be considered if we're thinking about this. I mean, I'm also very much in favor of doing this bike map and building up the network. But I wasn't aware of this parking issue, and it's an important one. And at least for me, it raises the question, if we're talking about enforcing it on new bike lanes, why wouldn't we try to have the town enforce it on the existing ones if it's not enforced now?
Agreed, we do. What happens when a biker gets injured? A cyclist. Sorry, bikers and motorcyclists. I've been told. Well, what happens when someone gets injured? You know what I mean. And from a risk management perspective, when we as a town necessarily haven't enforced currently our own bike lanes and people parking in our bike lanes now. What if someone was to get injured because they were trying to get away from something and they hit a car that was parked but it was in a bike lane? We are exposing ourselves to liability as well. So that's what I'm saying is we just need to figure this out as a town, and maybe Karis can bring some light to this.
I'm not sure if I'm going to help the situation. I just wanted to address the liability issue. And again, we can consult with the town's council. But my understanding from dealing with road issues and dealing with sidewalk issues is there's pretty significant protections under Mass state law towards a municipality as far as liability goes, and we're indemnified up to a certain dollar value. I think generally speaking, these things come up when we have people whose bushes grow, for example, in the right of way. We don't go and we trim them back. We don't touch private property, but we notify the abutter. I think that would be kind of a similar situation. It's somebody in a private function doing something they're not supposed to be doing, but we're not necessarily enforcing them from not doing it. So I'm not worried about the liability side. I do think from a practical perspective, it doesn't make sense to build a ton of bike lanes and then know that you're going to continually obstruct them with vehicles. So I think there's a practicality there.
Thank you, Karis.
So Karis, though, like, say we identify an area that we want to put a bike lane, and it requires removal of a stretch of parking. Is there a defined process for how that is supposed to work beyond public meeting sort of process? I mean,
so I don't really think we're talking about, this would correct me, but we're really talking about the downtown areas. We're not really talking about, like, we have de facto parking in many areas, but they're not striped parking spaces. There are areas where before we had parking, it was share the road anyways. So, I would imagine a biker would share the road for the portion where a car was incorrectly parked in the bike lane. But you're really thinking in the downtown corridor where we have striped marked parking. And there would be a public process for that because we have that as part of our regulation, how much parking is there, as well as many of the businesses that abut those areas actually have public parking as part of their permits. Now, that being said, and this is where there's all sorts of overlap within the community, there was a study that was done, I think 1.5 years ago by Stantec that looked at the business corridor and the downtown corridor and did an inventory of parking and effectively indicated that we are over our needed capacity for on-street parking. It required some solutions that were a little different than what we had done in the past. And basically what they said was there's plenty of parking in the downtown and the Heights. The problem is it's not all under town control. So a lot of it is in private hands and a lot of it's underutilized or it's not being utilized during peak time. For example, the number of banks we have in town that close at 5 when our peak time for downtown parking is actually 6 o'clock in the evenings for dinner. So the suggestion that we're just starting to implement through the study was, better sign our parking so people know where our parking lots are. We have better pedestrian circulation in the downtown as part of our downtown renovation project. And then it's partnering with some of these private parking lot owners and maybe coming to some sort of private-public partnership where they extend their lots to the public after hours. And maybe they put in a kiosk in order to charge a fee. So that way those parking spaces aren't sitting empty, they have a use. So all of that is to say it would probably have to go through the planning board and the select board. I know many of the spots in the downtown that are either zoned 2 hour or zoned with a parking meter. We have that in our regulation, and I believe there's a count associated with that. So that would be the conversation about removing parking. But luckily, I think 10 years ago, this would be like a third rail conversation. Like you just simply did not ever talk about the idea of removing parking. And I think when we had the pandemic and we were using parking more dynamically for on-street dining and a few other things, business owners and people within the town have sort of accepted that parking is not sacrosanct per se. So I imagine as part of, for example, the Great Plain redesign, or even the Highland Ave tip project, that there probably will be some reduction in parking as part of that as well. One thing that's interesting that we talked about with MassDOT, though, when we talk about protected bike lanes, and we'd had a conversation with them about, doing raised bike lanes or protected bike lanes, is that they do, under their regulation, they require protected bike lanes if you have over 10,000 passengers per day or trips per day. But they do see parking protected bike lanes. So if you have a parking spot between the lane of traffic and the bike lane, that they actually consider that a protected bike lane.
I think it, I mean, if we look at this yellow part of this map with plan where there's like dedicated on-street parking now, that may be lost at these big projects, like that is, I think, something separate maybe than what we're talking about if we're branching out from this into residential streets where there isn't really a parking space in front of someone's house. You can park a car there between, as long as it's not overnight, I guess. And I think maybe we're talking about how do we address the loss of that parking? Which is a little bit more like, that's someone's house and that's perceived, that's where they want to, park outside of your residence versus the downtown parking. I guess that's, through the town and the planning board, and like that can be, probably has a process now to figure out how to, what we can remove or what we have to keep. And maybe a lot of it can even stay, including some of the bike lanes. But when you branch out from that into a neighborhood, where once you stripe a bike lane outside of someone's house, they can no longer park there.
Yeah, and it could be a bike lane that does not have granite curbing against it, so people are parking straddling the berm now. And now we're going to be putting in a bike lane there that they can still physically park on, but enforcement.
So I think the question becomes, because we talked about this, about what we stripe and what we don't stripe. So like the very neighborhood roads right now, we don't have striping on them. So we probably wouldn't be adding a bike lane. But for like the Greendales or the Centrals where you have residential properties abutting a bike lane, I think we could look at it two ways. And the way it would, the way you would need to move forward is the select board would need to pass a regulation that would ban on-street parking. Which kind of effectively we've done with the bike lanes, but we haven't gone through that official process. There's sort of two things. One is that Needham has always had a restriction on overnight parking. So there's never been an absolute right to park on the street in town. So that's sort of just one thing as far as other communities where they might have on-street parking overnight or overnight over the summer. We do not allow it any time of year. And I think the second thing too is to look at the neighborhood, the size of the lot. Where this gets really challenging is like in the city of Boston, where you have very dense houses and very little room for driveways or parking spaces on an individual's property, where in Needham, at least, the vast majority of our zoning does provide enough space to park 2 or 3 cars within the parcel and doesn't necessarily require parking on the street. So I think it might be a neighborhood by neighborhood conversation. I think Greendale, I have also seen people park there, but it's not a high density. It's oftentimes, landscapers, for example, that seems to be like a high usage there. And so, I guess the question we have is it infrequent enough that a biker could reasonably get around that vehicle and it's really not posing a hazard? Or is it so, is it a neighborhood where there's constantly parking in front of somebody's house or along an entire stretch? In which case, obviously, it kind of defeats the entire purpose of having a bike lane if people are going to park there. I think a good example of this is when we did the Harris Ave project. We were originally going to run a bike lane down Harris Ave. And the main reason we didn't was because if you look at Harris Ave at pickup time, there is so much parking on where the bike lanes would be that it sort of defeated the whole purpose of having the bike lane for, primarily for the kids who are going to that school. So I think that's where you get the concern, is where you have lots of drop off and pickup or lots of people parking at the same time. So it might be a neighborhood by neighborhood approach. But I do think this, if you were adding the bike lane with the idea of having some serious enforcement on parking, I do think that's a conversation we should have with the select board.
Justin?
Yeah, just quickly, and I know I don't want to get lost in a Pandora's box. I do support increasing our bike lanes, but one of the things that I know, and I know Karis was involved in this as well as Tyler, when High Rock was restriped with fog lines that were put in, there were larger fog lines on one section of High Rock that was intended to be a bike lane, and I think that there were a lot of cars that were parking on there. When I expressed some concern about not putting in the little bike icons, the little spray icons that indicate that it was a bike lane, because we had so many people parking there, and we necessarily didn't go through that process of, because I don't think people would understand that they can't. Not many people understand that you can't park in a bike lane. That's the thing. There's a disconnect on the public's understanding of, you shouldn't park in a bike lane, which is also something that could potentially work in our advantage if we choose not to enforce it. But I just think we need to be cognizant of what we're going to do, especially if we are increasing our footprint and what arteries that we are doing so. I do support that, whether we work with the neighborhoods, from Karis said, as a neighborhood approach, or whether there needs to be a select board, edict to restrict parking in a certain area. If that's, if that's the way we do it, that's the way I have to do it. But I think we just need to be cognizant of it. That's all.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, on Harris, I've thought about this a few times, and even going up to Broad Meadow, and I don't know if this is like a non-starter, if it's a private way, but like in the grassy area between the sidewalk and the road, we just turn that into a bike lane. Like, it has a physical barrier. You've got the granite curb that is separating you from the road. Is there a way to make some modifications, maybe not everywhere, but in some places, to use that arguably kind of worthless small section of grass into a bike lane?
The berm you're talking about, really.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
called
Promenade.
There's no reason why we can't do that, other than, well, it's not constructible in every location, but
right,
if
yeah,
it-
it wouldn't
if-
be.
say,
wouldn't be-
say there aren't trees and all this other stuff in the
Yeah.
way, poles. There's no reason we can't do that.
Yeah, okay, cause like on Harris, the big section right in front of Pollard, right, there's nothing in that area.
Yeah, and there's telephone poles and there's trees and there's,
And it's not 4 feet wide either, which is
Yeah,
what
I
you
know
need
what
for
the
bikes, right?
rules are
Well-
for the width, but
you're talking about the grass promenade.
Oh, no, I thought he was
No,
talking
not
about
the
the
center.
berm.
Oh, you're in the berm.
when you got your sidewalk,
Okay.
and then you
yes.
got like little.
The center
section of-
berm or not? I'm sorry.
No,
what
it's
is-
not the
okay,
center
okay.
berm.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
like the design that's on Highland Ave, where you have.
Got
the
it,
side,
okay.
Then
Yep,
bicycle
so
lanes.
that's what they do up on the state section.
Okay.
Is it right over by like the Panera and stuff, where they would have grass.
Right.
Okay.
They have the asphalt,
Right.
cycle
Uh-huh.
track
Yes.
going through there. I think that the biggest obstacle will be constructability, and then you also have the sort of elephant in the room of, oh, well, I don't want
Mhm.
that in front of my house. Well, it's not really your property,
Mhm.
but just like with the parking, people feel like it's a little piece of their fiefdom, even if it's not
Right.
technically their land,
Just
so.
Yeah.
blame me, Tyler. We've done it before. We all know that. Anyway.
I mean, I
Yeah,
think
so-
that addresses.
so-
the Parking.
Yeah,
aspect.
yeah,
I mean,
so-
It comes with other issues, but.
Like earlier this week, Tim and I were discussing Harris, but not the section in front of the school, but there's the other section that we're paving at the moment. Or that we're, the section away from Pollard.
Mhm.
People do park on the street there, they can't park overnight, but say, we proceeded to paint a bike lane there. People will still park there unless there's enforcement that prevents them from parking there. Regardless of what's going on with
Yeah, I mean, there's,
the school.
and there's physical barriers that you could install, there's flex posts, there's a whole other can of worms, there's a whole toolkit of bike lane materials.
I'm not
to-
saying that's why we shouldn't do it.
Right,
I'm just
yeah.
saying there'll be a resident education sort of.
Yeah.
Pushback.
Sure, I think there's also like, when you look at the neighborhood itself, it's like specifically this part of Harris Ave. There are, like the residents who live there the majority of them have abutting streets to park on in front of their house, and so it really only affects a few people versus many, like if you
Or your
took.
driveway.
If you took the one section of Harris Ave on the easternmost side and one on the westernmost side, there aren't really any. As many conflicts as if you did the whole thing at once, and so, you know. I think there's some desire to like expand this. The infrastructure that we have. From the select board and, you know, like, where's like the low hanging fruit, you know, if we're looking at these specific neighborhoods. And where like parking maybe isn't as big of an issue as it seems, it may be like the right way to like start doing that. And the Harris Ave bike lanes have been. On record for like 20 years, and it's, you know, it's been presented over and over again, and so. There are other solutions. You know, especially school drop off, like there's a different way to do that could be implemented. It doesn't require parking on the edge of the road or, you know, so there are other options like beyond that.
Notwithstanding Justin's caution, which I totally agree with, the charge or the request from the select board, could we do it in phases? Decide intentionally on which roads we would like to have a bike line, where we where we want to channel our bike traffic, and that's referred to this committee. I think we should take that up. And do it in like a sequenced or phased way. Where would we like them, and then deal with the parking issue, you know?
Yeah,
No?
I agree.
No,
that's
yeah, when we first started talking about it, I was just saying that I think that we should sort of start that conversation with the expectation that we will be getting future guidance from the street design guide, and that'll play into
Yeah.
it.
I think that the street design guide will be important too, because we made 30-foot roads. Like, you know, classifying them, that fits 5-foot bike lanes with 10 feet lane, you know, 10-foot lanes. The design guide should have that information in it. So that we can say, like, you know, this road already has a center line, it's already 30 feet wide. And so the bike lanes fit here, does it make sense in the context of our network? And then we can
Yeah,
put a little yellow highlight on that.
yeah, I feel like if we all went home with a map of Needham and we took a highlighter on where we want the bike lanes to go.
Just not me, right?
And then. And then we, yeah, all the streets,
Yeah.
and then we would come back to the table, and then DPW would tell us. Tell everybody why we can't do it here, we can't
Right.
do it there, we can't do it there, you know, I wanna be careful not to do that, but I feel like.
I think if we're cautious about where it makes sense the most and where it already fits, and then have a discussion about whether or not we can actually. get
Yeah,
There.
yeah.
There's a few different contexts there, whether the network side of it and does it actually fit in the road? And then, the other one is like creating, and again, the design guide, there are, they're called neighborways or bike boulevards, or like neighborhood greenways, where like you may take a stretch like Manning, which goes across town, and you're not putting bike lanes on it, but you're making it a safe place to be in the street.
Like slow streets.
A slow street, yeah, you probably have to divert traffic with a partial closure, or a full closure in the middle of it. And traffic calming to keep it low and mark it that way. And you could increase the bike infrastructure there. That's like, you know, most of the middle of our town. You know, doesn't need bike lane, we don't need bike lanes on every street, but we can make the street safe to bike on in other ways. It's still infrastructure that's needed there, but.
Yeah,
You know, there's not as big of a parking issue there, and then, you know, like the main arterials are. You know, really where,
right,
like the bike lane is, how do you get from, you know, Great Plain Ave. To the Dedham line, for this whole neighborhood, there needs to be a bike lane. For that main arterial road, but all the in-betweens can be. Safe streets, slow streets.
So it sounds like in some sense, we should wait until the design guide is here to actually start this selection of preferred routes. But you asked earlier about getting this on GIS, and doing that will help me, and I think everyone, play with it somewhat and understand better, because I find it difficult to work with this.
Yeah, I just want, this was just for this meeting,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
obviously with GIS, it's like. We can set up, so right now, we have like a construction, map. That's visible by the public that uses GIS to mark like, look. The streets that we're doing work on, so I'd imagine it'd be something similar to that we could share, that we could all look at online.
Mhm.
It's not gonna be able to be printed easily,
Right.
but without it being huge paper, but.
Oh, that's fine.
It was hard enough for me to get it so that you could kind of read the streets.
I like this one.
Yeah.
But will GIS count mileage? Like, can you query it to tell you like how many miles of painted bike lanes you have, or how many miles of?
Yeah, it can do like
Yeah.
some
You should.
simple calculations, yeah. It probably wouldn't be like, it's not gonna like. Find an optimal route between A and B.
Right, but I mean, we could say that today, as of 2024, like, we have 3 miles or 4 miles of bike lanes. In 2024, we did like, 3,000 feet of bike lanes, and then maybe that's something that the select board can take, like, oh, this is how we're working towards it.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah,
We're
that's
growing.
doable.
this as we go along, and maybe there's like some sort of metric. That we have in our committee to grow that every year by a certain number or percentage, or.
Okay, so,
Is that something, Tyler, we can meet with the GIS admin? Because I know that there was the shift over to maybe engineering, I think it was the GIS. There was a shift and change, but that is definitely something that is within the capabilities of GIS within other municipalities. It really all depends upon A, the package that was purchased, B, the competency of, the people that set it up, it's et cetera. But yes, that is all something that we should be able to obtain from the database. But
Yeah,
is that something we can do to meet with them individual, see what the capability is of the system?
yeah, so maybe the first step is just to kind of develop like. A GIS reference tool that we can build on with. A more professional version of this map. And I can kind of work on populating it to make sure that. Everything's accurate and that it shows, a distinction between. So like, for instance, on like Central Avenue. There's some sections where there's a bike lane on one side. And the other side is interrupted, or it turns to shoulder or something like that. I wasn't able to like represent that on here, but that's something that, we can pursue a little further. So. I will say that we have one GIS guy.
Mhm.
And he is always saying that he's really busy, so we can try to get this sort of like. Get the ball rolling with him. Maybe we'll. It'll be something that I can kind of keep tabs on as we develop it, and then.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. I mean, if we could either meet with them individually, whatever. I've talked to you before about just getting a speed zone map of what what our actual speed zones are not regulatory, but statutory speed limits are in town. Where they all are as an overlay on GIS. But if that would be great if we could meet either as a committee or even one-on-one with like the committee leadership. I know Paul has you have some experience, I remember, with GIS. Is that I remember?
I mean, I had asked about it early on.
Okay.
I used it a few times, but I'm definitely not.
Yeah.
Got
So
it,
maybe,
okay.
maybe that's at least the direction we can go in.
Okay.
Get this started, and we can kind of check back in with it as we have developments.
Perfect.
Sure, I mean, there's also the Needham bike plan.
Right.
Which was included in the packet, but it's been around for quite some time.
Yeah, it's like 25 years. old.
Yeah, 25 years, and some of it is done, like, this is part of it, but there are other streets that like until. Until it's vetted to say that that's no longer appropriate, like, I mean, we can still use that as our starting point. And then as we talk about the complete streets urbanization plan, There are a lot of bike projects on there as well that aren't included in yellow on here.
Yeah.
So like, there are currently planned bike projects that we can start with as well to start to like build this out.
Yeah.
What exists already.
Yeah, and one note on that is that the old bike plan. Was the town engineer at the time. Most likely had a lot of influence over that plan. His name's on it, and he was pretty conservative when it comes to. That sort of infrastructure, so I almost feel like. I mean, obviously it's old, but it really does need like a full. Comprehensive update.
Yeah.
Because we might be able to. Like priorities have shifted, we have a new person in my role, new person in the town engineer role. Since I came out, so. It can kind of be like a starting point, but I think that. Just taking those locations and putting them on here, we need to look at it critically.
I'm cognizant of the time and
Okay,
the
Sure.
agenda. We also have 3 other items that were referred to this committee. Are we
I think
planning,
that's the first two, so we'll clean it up. The next two, which are the creation of a mountain biker trail. And the
bike
event-
infrastructure, do they mean something different
I think
than lanes?
that's what we're talking about. Yeah, bike infrastructure, bike lanes.
Not, bike parking and things like that? No? Okay.
I mean,
It's
we want
not-
that too.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's how I read this. I
Yeah.
didn't know what they meant.
Yeah, I think it's going to definitely be a factor that plays into the downtown streetscape project.
Okay.
Like bike parking on
Okay,
that.
so,
I think the infrastructure kind of encapsulates anything that is from a lane to
okay,
bike rack, I guess, could be
Okay.
bike infrastructure.
Yeah, we wanna make sure we have like a decent network, so we
Yeah.
can know where the
yeah,
points are, where it would be most effective to deploy parking.
And so then the next two are explore the creation of a mountain biker trail from Kendrick Street. I think that we should refer this either back to them or to Parks and Rec. I don't think that's in our charge as a part of.
I know nothing about it, so. I don't know if anyone.
Yeah, is
On this call.
anyone, the trail.
What was that?
exists.
What was that again? Sorry.
So
The
it's
mountain bike trail?
explore the creation of a mountain biker trail extending from Kendrick Street in parallel to Greendale Ave. Refer to the mobility committee. The trail exists, it's there now.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's within our charge. It seems like more of a Parks and Rec.
if it exists, so what do they mean, creation? Put a sign on it, or, I mean,
I don't-
I'm serious, I
yeah.
really don't
It
understand.
could be, like formalizing the trail, like making it like
Yeah,
a
that's-
more appropriate surface.
I think that's a Parks and Rec, like there's
Okay.
the assistant Park and Rec is doing like trails programs and I think that's like.
I agree with that.
It's a recreation kind
A
of.
deflection. I agree.
And then the next one was evaluate the issue of bicycles on sidewalk. I think that the issues will probably be solved with our big projects, which are in the areas where they're not allowed to ride on the sidewalks. And that hopefully there are sidewalk level bike lanes in most of those areas.
So correct me, the select board just allowed, I shouldn't say just, maybe it was a while ago. There was a prohibition in the bylaws of bikes on sidewalks outside of downtown districts, but they allowed that now. Because I want to tell you that I would never let my daughter
Yeah,
on a street in Needham, not on a sidewalk.
bikes are allowed on sidewalks except for in the downtown area.
Yeah, okay, yeah, great,
That's
okay,
actually
yeah.
a state, I think it's maybe a state regulation or bylaw or rule.
Yeah.
But, however, this, like, when we look at the downtown redesign and then, possibly Highland Ave, which are the areas where they're not supposed to be on sidewalks, there may be sidewalk level bike lanes in those areas.
Yeah, the wording that it says on the bylaw, no person shall ride a bicycle on any sidewalk within certain marked areas of Needham Square and the Heights Square business districts. That's,
So everywhere else, they are allowed.
Everywhere else you would be allowed, and I think that was codified again by the board, which is fine because we'll, yeah, people drive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just hold back.
So
So on that issue, do we just get back to the select board and say, we think it'll be taken care of with these other
I
projects?
believe so,
basically?
yes, I believe that's the proper response.
I don't really know what, without being there when they discussed it, I don't really know what angle they're
I
referring
think
to.
one of the select board members
Like,
was concerned about
Doesn't want-
someone like
like, man,
almost running into them on a sidewalk somewhere. And so,
Right,
and then
okay.
people
I'll check it
start, I believe someone also maybe made a comment to the select board about like
So biking in downtown is what they were
in
talking
downtown.
about. Okay, got it.
on
Got
the
it.
sidewalk. Yeah.
that's like another thing where the police probably don't want to be writing tickets for this stuff, but should they be, like, according to
No.
the letter?
And honestly, you can't tell a resident whose 5-year-old or 6-year-old or 7-year-old is riding a bike on the street, no matter what the bylaw says, they can go. I mean, honestly, I would say it doesn't matter what the bylaw says. I want my kid on the sidewalk because the street is a hazard. You know what I mean? But sorry, go ahead, Karis.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was just privy to this specific conversation and it was not children in the downtown that they were referring to. It was adults in the downtown or
Oh.
much older children. It wasn't
Got
like
it.
little kids with their parents in the downtown.
Got it.
And I think part of it was we used to have signs as you were entering the downtown that specifically said no riding on the sidewalk. Those signs have not been reinstalled or not there. But I think again, because we're looking at adding bike accommodation on Highland Ave and on Great Plain Ave, I think the issue kind of becomes no longer relevant because we'll have a protected space
Yep.
for everybody to use, whether they're kids or adults or anybody else. Initially, I think the general vision had been with the downtown when they were going to renovate it, the idea would be walking your bike through the downtown. So I'll say I grew up in Needham. I'm a biker. My mother doesn't drive. And that's what we did. We would get off our bikes. We'd walk down Great Plain Ave and then we get on the other side of the, the other side of the town towards Linden and you get back on your bike and you ride. I think that's how it's intended to be applied. But I think the general consensus I heard was if you're walking along and your young child is also biking on the sidewalk with you, that was not really the concern. It was people who were going much faster than that and who are much bigger than that on the town sidewalks, which
Got it.
are not as wide as I think people would like in the first place.
Completely makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll put the signs back up when the time comes.
Okay, so then I guess we can move on from that. Any other discussion? Oh, that's okay. Off-street trails. So this is, we put this on here. You want to speak a little bit about,
Well, I believe 2-3 meetings ago, I raised it because I wanted to get the projects associated with extension of the rail trail back on the select board's goals. That time has passed. I mean, I guess that there's still some opportunity, but I think for next year, they're not gonna change that. The goals they decided on last week. So if that's what this was, and I'm not entirely sure why it's here.
At your request.
Okay, I do want, I mean, is this committee an appropriate venue to identify projects and if you will, advocate for them, or at least see if the select board and DPW and so forth are interested in them. Because we are talking about expanding bike infrastructure, and that's one, in my mind, key piece of bike infrastructure. And I will just update you all, if you haven't heard, on Dover. Dover is moving forward now with their bike greenway, their pedestrian bike greenway. They got $184,000 from Mass Trails for the design, and it will go from the Medfield line to the Needham line. It won't cross the Charles River, and that's still a 7-figure budget project. But this is real progress, and the town is actually pushing it now, not the Friends of Needham Dover Greenway. So stay tuned on that. That's going to happen over the next year. That they'll have a final design, how the engineering done, and so forth. So there's hope that eventually it'll all connect.
James, can I build on that a little bit?
The riffraff.
Please.
Needham. Go ahead, sir.
So I know where you're going there, Justin. So the I guess I have to add, I'll add on to what you have about Dover. So two things. One is that we are doing a project with Dover and a budding bridge to the rail trail on Charles River Street. And that particular bridge will be designed with a bike amenity on it. It will be a complete reconstruction. And what we've sort of talked about tangentially, and this is Dover and Needham, is that potentially there's a path that you could make from our existing rail trail to the bridge, go over this several $1 million bridge that we have to construct anyways, and then go back on the Dover side. So I think that offers some potential positive benefit. The state, part of their complete streets, is going to want a bike lane anyways. And they were sort of like hit or miss about whether we needed one, and we indicated we had a bike path there. So there might be like a multimodal lane on that bridge that would get you across the Charles River and over to Dover. So that's helpful.
Yep.
And then the second thing is we're looking at meeting with Dover, and if everything sounds like we're on the same page, eventually meet with Medfield, Dover, and Needham, I think, to discuss that second project that you're interested in, which is the connectivity to the junction. And I think that conversation, at least in my eyes, really came in when we had a kind of more of a regional project, because the cost is just exceeds what the town is likely to be able to absorb internally. But a Medfield, Dover, Needham bike trail that has connectivity to an economic center and connectivity to commuter and bus is very attractive for the state to look at either projects through DCR for economic development and for transit. So that might give us some leverage to look for all three communities to potentially build the rail trail up. So that way it's a paved trail as opposed to stone dust, because we know that that requires some periodic maintenance that's a little bit involved. And then also potentially have them invest in the several $1 million solution of connecting it over to the junction. So I think those are kind of not in the near term, but those are two connectivity points. And then I would say maybe more towards this committee is alternatively, knowing that that's several years in the future, is it possible to build some bike infrastructure or some on-street bike infrastructure connecting the junction to the trail without necessarily building the bike path out, but doing something on on Fisher and South, and then Chestnut. And then Chestnut's also being evaluated. Again, this is more in the future, but if there's some larger development happening there, either with the hospital or a private developer, there's some opportunity there to do some complete streets accommodation on Chestnut Street that might give you a dedicated bike lane to then carry you to the downtown. So I think there's pieces that are moving and nothing stalled, which I think was one of your concerns. As far as that project goes, I think we just need to make sure, I think if Medfield, Needham, and Dover are all on the same page, I do think a 7-mile bike trail that connects two non-service communities from the MBTA's perspective to an MBTA station makes it a nice project. And I'll say on the maintenance side, one of the struggles I have with the project as it is now is where it dead ends, kind of becomes an attractive nuisance a little bit. And we have kids who go out and do graffiti and stuff. And so I think having that throughput from Dover and having a higher traffic count will help deal with some of those public nuisance issues.
Yeah, great points. I don't want to belabor it now. I have a number of reactions, questions, comments, but perhaps, Karis, I can meet with you at some near-term date as part of the Rail Trail Advisory Committee, but also the Baycon Rail Trail Association, which I'm active in, because we have been working on a number of those things that you mentioned. I thought there was also reconstruction of the Central Ave Bridge contemplated, and I believe Kate asked us, and I complied for a letter of support to add the multimodal lane
That's
on
the
that.
same
I
bridge.
apologize, I misspoke. It's not the Charles River
Oh,
Bridge, it's the Central Bridge.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed
Central
that.
Center Street.
Okay, yeah, okay. Great.
Yeah, I just point out that like when you look at this map here, those two projects really connect Medfield and Millicent over to Newton and to the Green Line.
Yep.
Um, and
Yep.
even further, so I think, we can even, go to Dedham and Boston, pretty quickly with a little bit of extra, like, infrastructure here, which is good for grants and
Right.
applying for funding.
Right, and by the way, Karis, we had funded the Bay County Rail Trail Association, a feasibility study on on multiple paths to connect. And I don't know if you've seen it, I did send it to both Shane and years and years ago, Tony. Anyway, so we should touch base on all of this because we're extremely interested in what you're talking about and may be able to help with it on some level, because we are very actively engaged with both Medfield and Dover. And the Bay County Rail Trail Association actually funded part and actually planned much of the Medfield Trail.
Just maybe one more point, James, is that in our design guide, there should be probably an off trails guidance section, so that if these happen, that they're to the specs that the rail trail committee believes appropriate.
Yep.
Lane width and.
Yep.
Separation.
Consistency would be ideal.
Okay, next one is the updates on the Needham Center Project Working Group and the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan.
So these are gonna be quick. Just wanted to let everyone know that the working group for the downtown, Great Plain Ave project is being voted on tomorrow. And it will have, the I included the sort of the breakdown of the members of that working group, which will include a member from this committee, as well as from TSC, all these other organizations and resident and business stakeholders. So that's really the only update on that. We're still ironing out the scope for the designer on the project. But time is of the essence on that because we want to apply for some grants. So that'll be expedited as much as possible. So the plan so far is kind of to use the next, the scope from the design will take us through the end of the year, and that'll include sort of the data gathering, fact finding tasks of the design phase and everything needed to sort of put together a preliminary concept, which will be the next phase will be focused on ironing that out, public engagement, all that good stuff. So. Complete Streets prioritization plan. I shared that with everyone. It's on the town website for everyone to look at. I've been going through this just to sort of note things that we've since gotten to or things have changed. So the idea here is that I'm currently exploring every 3 years, you're permitted to update the prioritization plan with the state. We're going to need the Complete Streets money for the downtown project, and downtown project is not on the plan as of now. So it's going to require us to update the plan to include it to be eligible for the funding. And that's like, a significant portion of the funding. So there is so I can use Chapter 90 money to fund a consultant to help us update the plan. But the question is that, how much of this do we want to open up to discussion? I have my own ideas, things like that. So that's kind of just what I wanted to put out on the table. And
Do we need to have the consultant to write like downtown project on the box and then submit to the state, or like can we save a little bit of money?
there's other things that they have to It's not as easy as just
Okay.
writing down a list.
All right, what's the vintage of this list? What year? Is this 18 or is this more recent?
I believe it was 18. Karis, do you recall? I think it was
I
18.
mean, the memo says it was updated in 2018, but I don't know if that's related to this.
That's the policy
Yeah.
maybe, so maybe that's when we got tier 3. So that,
Yeah, there's in order to establish a prioritization plan list, you need to have.
The
that
policy, okay, so this happened after this,
Yeah.
but we don't know exactly when.
It was within a year.
Oh, so 18 or 19.
Yeah. So in any case, we're eligible to revise the list.
and then we can get the complete streets grant and then 3 years and then,
Yeah, so every 3 years, you're eligible to receive the maximum amount of funding again. You can submit for smaller projects in between those 3 years, as long as they don't cumulatively exceed the total. So what? We had a cycle where we requested the maximum amount for the Harris Ave project. That included like the intersection redesign and other improvements on Harris Avenue. So we received the maximum amount for that, but since then, we're now eligible again for the next round of funding.
What is the max?
I think it's 500 flat. So we got like 499,
Yeah.
something like that. But you know, that's gonna be a fraction of what will ultimately be needed for downtown, so
and so should we? When you redo this list, is it, the consultant's gonna take care of it, or do you want us to tell you? Like what should be changed, or are we like keeping most of the things on here, or?
so I guess what I'm saying is that I have my priorities, and I'd like to get feedback on some of them, and then the consultant will kind of synthesize those things together into a new list. But more to come on that.
You'll share your priorities with them.
So we have not yet contracted with a consultant. But I just wanted to put it on everyone's radar so that we can kind of look through the list and come to our own conclusions and then.
Could you just, not now, but sometime after this, indicate which one's already done?
Right, that's what I'm working on.
There are four that I looked at that I think are complete. 4 out of those, you've already,
Yeah.
Ferry Park, Dedham, Central Ave.
Yep, and some of them we've like half completed, and then we kind of didn't do the rest of
Yeah, there's
it,
one,
or
two,
there was
three.
some reason why we didn't do the rest of it. So that's kind of why I want it to be refreshed and, even if we don't have, like, we sort of spend all the money that we're eligible for this round on one project. It's still good to have as like a guidance document and sort of, and priorities, that's the name of the program, so.
We can pull some of our bike lanes out of this list too.
When do you need,
Right.
Tyler, when do you think you need feedback on that? Because I would love to be able to have some of the members of TSC, just given the institutional knowledge of, knowing every pain point that there is in town, to be able to provide some feedback. But I know we don't meet in August, so.
Right, so by the next time this committee meets. I should have I'll have the whole list sort of marked up and.
Great.
Things that are done, we can. Check off, other things are more like open to interpretation, and that's the sort of stuff that. I would like feedback on, so I'll put something together and share it with everyone and.
Okay, and I'll provide some feedback. It's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's the end of our agenda. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, take a roll call vote. Chair votes aye. Duncan? James?
Aye.
Paul? Justin?
Aye.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.
All right.
Thank you,
That's all.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Bye, Alex. I'll see you in a couple days. 2 days.